Hi everyone, hope you had a nice holiday weekend and were able to enjoy some time with friends and family or just relaxing or something away from the classroom for a little bit. I just want to talk a little bit about last week's work and also give you a little snapshot of what's to come for this week. So last week we talked about revenue cycle. As I had mentioned in last week's Ed Puzzle, revenue cycles incredibly important to the overall financial management of any organization. I think that one of the keys is that in the past we focused on elements of the revenue cycle, but we didn't kind of look at the whole picture. And I think by being able to look at the whole picture from birth to death of an account, we really see places where we can make improvements and build efficiencies in the clinical setting, in admissions, registration, in billing and coding, medical records, etc. So we can really find some of those efficiencies by examining the revenue cycle as a whole. So good work last week. I look forward to reading your short paper about the notion of indicators. What are some of the indicators about revenue cycle? How do we manage revenue cycle, or how do we evaluate revenue cycle, etc. One quick comment about credit. So in our Flipgrid, we talked about credit, and I had already made some comments in the Flipgrid itself, but we've talked about credit and how hospitals extend credit to patients. Should they do that? Should it be left to outside financiers? And I know some of you felt that hospitals didn't extend credit, but as I'd mentioned in the Flipgrid, they actually do. It's just in a different way. Imagine being able to walk into the grocery store and say, hey, I'm going to take all these groceries, but I don't get paid until Friday. So if you can just give me these groceries now and I'll pay you on Friday, then that's credit. And of course, grocery stores don't do that. They want a credit card or cash or a debit card at the time of purchase. In the hospital setting, we have someone that comes in. They might come in through the emergency room. There might be an elective patient having elective services, be it surgery or labs or radiology. We invite them into our facility. We say, hey, hopefully you're going to pay, and we're not sure that you're going to pay, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt and give you credit. And it's not just, we're not just talking about folks that don't have insurance. When you think about people with the larger deductible health plans, high deductible health plans, a patient may have a $5,000 deductible. Now, maybe you have $5,000 hanging out in your bank account that's kind of disposable income, but I know that I don't. So being able to pay that $5,000 deductible at the time the bill comes and pay it in 90 days, which is typically the time frame for payment on a hospital bill, it's not likely to happen. Also, hospitals, they don't necessarily, they extend credit to everybody. So most hospitals don't turn patients away if they don't have the ability to pay. Some people may not have the ability to pay because maybe they have great jobs, but maybe they also have high debt levels. So all of their funding that they have coming in is going to fund other things like their mortgage or their vehicles or their credit cards, and so they may not have funding to turn around and pay a facility within 90 days. Now, it doesn't mean that that person's going to be eligible for a financial assistance program. They could very well make too much. But so when we think about extending credit, we're not just talking about treating patients for free under charity care programs. We're talking about all of those scenarios. Every time we have a patient that comes in that may or may not be able to pay their co-payments, their deductibles, or services in full. And that's why a lot of facilities have made that transition to go with companies like Care Credit or Clear Balance, those type of organizations that take that issue off of the plate. So a facility maybe has $1 million outstanding at the end of that 90 days. What do they do with it? Well, they're going to sell it for pennies on the dollar to a collector. Whereas when they work with an organization like Clear Credit or Clear Balance or Care Credit, in those situations, they're going to be working with those organizations right from the start, identifying patients that are going to need that extended time to pay, and then the financier, the Clear Balance or Care Credit or one of those types of companies, they're the ones that are going to qualify them for those services and give them that additional time to pay, offer them credit for 12 months, 16 months, 18 months, however long they might need. So it takes that off the plate of the hospital, and it also allows hospitals to make much more of the owed amount instead of selling after 90 days for pennies on the dollar to a collector. So well, slightly extended conversation there, I apologize, but I want to make sure that everyone's aware of the fact that we're right now extending credit to anybody that walks in our door that we don't require payment up front for deductibles, coinsurance, co-payments. So some people do collect some of that up front, but most of us, at least in the hospital setting, we're not doing a good job of collecting that up front. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about week 7. Week 7 is we're moving from revenue cycle to looking at materials management, supply chain. So supply chain is an area where we can truly find efficiencies across the system, and looking at inventories, supplies, those types of things, and how do we manage that. So we'll have some discussion on that this week. But the other thing that's very important this week is your final project. So your final projects are due this week, you want to be writing a research paper, 5 to 8 pages of the body. So you want a significant research paper, but you also want to be analytical in your examination of the topic. So don't just regurgitate what you're seeing in the resources. I want you to look at multiple resources and then make some analysis of the situation. If you're looking at fraud and abuse, you might look at what fraud and abuse is, give me some basics, but then what are ways that we're currently combating these issues, and what are additional ways that we could look to combat these issues. That's just because that's a topic that's always at the top of my brain, but similar situations for any of the topics that you might be doing. Also, remember APA. So it's a research paper. You're going to be using a lot of information from resources. Anytime you use information from an outside resource, you need to cite that in text, not just at the end of your paper. So if you share information and you paraphrase it, so you've read it, you've digested it, now you're restating it in your own words, that still requires an in-text citation. It's not just for those direct quotes. So be sure that you're using that as well. And I think that's probably it for the final project, but it is due this week. It's due in week 7 by Sunday night normal time for our assignments. So there was one quiz question. The paper out here, sorry. There's one quiz question I did want to go over. It was the only one that was missed this week. The quiz question was, which of the following is an advantage of having an internal control system? And actually, I just closed the book, but I wanted to... So internal control is, where is that list of questions? Internal control is an important element of our, if I can find the internal control section, sorry. I had the paper in that for a reason. 57, there we go. So internal control systems are those systems that put those checks and balances in place for management of your financial management overall, for the revenue cycle, for various aspects of your operations. So the answers were, so which of the following is an advantage of having an internal control system? A was it gives employees direction through policies and procedures. B was it reduces the risk of losing assets through errors. And then C was choices A and B. So the answer was choices A and B. And in your textbook on page, if I can get to the page here, page 258, there's actually a nice detailed listing of what internal control folks, like in this case it was an audit of accounts receivable, but the types of things they'll be looking at when they complete these audits. One of the facilities I worked at, I was the Director of Compliance and Risk Management, and so the internal control folks actually reported to me. They tend to look more holistically at the financial process. In this case, of the checklist in the book, they're looking at accounts receivable, but they're not just looking at dollars and cents. They're looking at checks and balances. So what policies do you have? Procedures, are they being followed? Are you working through logically to complete, obviously, accounts receivable, or that's going to be your billing function. So are they making sure that they have all of their checks and balances in place, that we're avoiding fraud, we're avoiding abuse, but we're also avoiding errors, and we're working efficiently. So it's not just the risk of losing assets through errors, it's also providing them that direction through policies and procedures and what they need to do to work efficiently and effectively in their areas. So that's what internal control does for us. It's very much a check and balance check to make sure that we are operating efficiently. Internal control tends to be, the organization that I was at was kind of odd that it actually reported to compliance. It tends to be its own area. Oftentimes, if you're part of a larger organization, internal control will be above you. It'll be not at your organizational level, but for example, the one facility I worked at when I worked in finance, we were a hospital, specific hospital, but we were part of what at that time was the Daughters of Charity system. It's since been bought by Ascension, and they maybe even have changed their names as well. But so Daughters of Charity overall, all of the Daughters of Charity hospitals, they had corporate level internal control folks that worked in our facilities. So although I worked hand in hand with our internal control officer, he was not an employee of our facility, and so he had that kind of separate unbiased view. He wasn't collecting a paycheck from our organization, and so he was kind of oversight from the higher level. So, so that was the scoop for that one quiz question. Everyone got the rest of them correct, so no issues there. If you have any questions about your final project for this week, please let me know. And I encourage everybody to get to work on it earlier rather than later, so that you have the time to edit your work, go through. One of the bigger problems that I'm seeing, not necessarily in this class, but just overall in papers this term, is that folks are not proofreading, and they're doing a lot of writing that sounds like they're talking to somebody, and you want your writing to be much more formal than that. Also, we have resources. We have the Smart Thinking resource. I would encourage people to use Grammarly. It's another great resource out there. But take the time, even just running the check in Word itself for grammar. Set it to the formal setting, because we want it to be checking for things like passive voice, etc. So, so all of those things are things that are important when you're writing a research paper, and I want everyone to do well. I don't want you losing points for things like commas and apostrophes and APA. Those are things that are pretty straightforward, what I'm seeing is a lot of people are grasping the concepts, but they're having trouble kind of sharing that with me. So if you have questions in any of those areas, please let me know. But otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing everyone in the discussion this week. Thanks.